In a graduate class one afternoon, a 10-year-old boy suddenly walked in. The students couldn't care less about this lecture on perpetual motion, but the boy? He was full of confidence.
I accept the challenge.
The professor just laughed it off, thinking it was a childish joke. What he didn't realize was that this boy had an extraordinary gift for design. After countless hours of hard work, Spivey actually built a machine that could, in theory, run for 400 years. But no one expected that behind this young genius was a family that barely noticed him. His father was a quiet cowboy, a man of few words. His mother, a brilliant entomologist, spent most of her time buried in research, and the favorite child of the house was his younger brother, a boy who had inherited their father's wild spirit. Spivey's brother was good at everything: riding, shooting, and winning their father's pride, while Spivey, in his father's eyes, was just an awkward, introverted kid who drew strange diagrams all day. Spivey thought he would spend his whole life in that cold, distant household. But one day, an accident changed everything. His brother was outside practicing with his rifle, and Spivey, curious as ever, asked to record the sound waves of the gunshot. The next second, the gun went off, and his brother's young life ended in an instant. After that, no one in the family ever mentioned his brother again. It was as if the boy had never existed. No one blamed Spivey, but he could feel his father growing even colder toward him, wanting to bridge the gap. Spivey built a detailed 3D model of their farm, hoping it might help solve their water shortage problem. But before he could explain it, his father brushed him off completely.
Yeah, it's me. I was just pissing the camp. Open your eyes, you see that?
His father's indifference crushed him, and what hurt even more was watching his mother drown herself in endless work to avoid facing the pain of losing her child. Even his sister barely spoke to him. The coldness in the house became unbearable, and finally, Spivey decided to leave. Then one day, the phone rang. It was the Smithsonian Science Society. They told Spivey that his perpetual motion design had just won the prestigious Baird Award, and that he was invited to Washington, D.C. for the ceremony. Overjoyed, he rushed to tell his sister, but she didn't believe a word of it, and Spivey knew if even she didn't believe him, his parents definitely wouldn't either. He didn't want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so after some thought, he decided to travel alone over 1,000 kilometers to Washington. Late that night, he quietly packed his bags and tiptoed downstairs, but he stopped halfway. He didn't want to disappear without a word, so he wrote a note, telling his family not to worry, that he'd be back after the event. Before leaving, curiosity got the better of him. He slipped his mother's diary into his bag. At sunrise, Spivey began his journey, but he had no idea how difficult the road ahead would be. To catch a train, he painted a yellow signal light bright red, and to his surprise, the train actually stopped. He climbed aboard and finally set off toward Washington. Along the way, Spivey saw rivers, plains, and mountain ranges he'd only ever seen in books. He watched the vast grasslands of the West give way to the winding rivers of the Midwest, feeling for the first time how deeply life depends on nature. As he leaned out the window, the wind seemed to carry away all his sadness and fear. For the first time, he felt free, but his journey didn't stay smooth for long. When the train reached an industrial zone, an announcement came on security inspection ahead. Panicking, Spivey hid inside a camper being shipped by rail. When inspectors entered, he pretended to be a mannequin, and somehow, it worked. That night, hungry and tired, he slipped off the train to buy a sausage from a food stall, something his mom had never allowed him to eat. Just as he was about to pay, he spotted a police officer holding a missing person flyer with his own face on it. Heart pounding, he turned away. Luckily, the officer didn't notice, but the stall owner did. She recognized him instantly, yet instead of calling the police, she softly said, "Your parents must be worried sick. You should go home." Kid, Spivey wanted to go home, but he couldn't. There was a wall between him and his family, one he didn't know how to cross. That night, unable to sleep, he opened his mother's diary. In the dim light, he saw old family photos. For the first time in a long while, he felt a bit of warmth. Her diary wasn't just notes about insects. It was filled with love and pain. She often found herself walking to his brother's empty room, ready to wake him for school, only to remember he was gone. She wrote that she'd noticed how sad Spivey had become, and many times wanted to talk to him, but didn't know how. She even wondered if she was to blame, if her distance had made her son stop reaching out. Reading this, Spivey finally understood. His mother had always cared, but they were both trapped in their own grief, too afraid to take the first step. The next morning, Spivey's train reached Washington, D.C. He hid his suitcase, packed only the essentials, and caught a ride with a kind truck driver, who even reminded him to buckle up. They chatted the whole way, until Spivey dozed off and woke to find they'd finally arrived. When he stepped into the Smithsonian building, his heart was racing with excitement, but the receptionist froze when she heard his name. How could a 10-year-old have won the Baird Award? Still, she called the chairwoman, and when the woman arrived, she too couldn't believe it. The perpetual motion machine on display, admired by scientists from around the world, was built by this little boy. But then Spivey opened his mouth and said,
I just transposed the principle of an electron gravitating around the nucleus. But as you know, to simulate its perpetual motion would require the creation of a negative entropy. which is simply not possible.
The chairwoman was stunned. She immediately recognized his brilliance. Soon, she made him the face of the award ceremony. Polished, photographed, celebrated. When Spivey stepped on stage, the applause was thunderous. Nervously, he greeted the crowd and began. "You all have degrees and titles. I'm just an elementary school kid, so I don't have much to teach you. Just 3 things to say. First, thank you for not judging me by my age. Second, about my perpetual motion machine. It runs on magnetic force, but the magnetism will fade in 400 years. To build a true perpetual motion device, we still have a long way to go." His words struck deep. The crowd was amazed, inspired. Then, his tone changed. He spoke about his brother's death. How if he hadn't suggested recording that gunshot? His brother might still be alive. Tears filled his eyes, and the audience fell silent. Moments later, everyone stood and applauded, moved by his honesty and pain. But no one noticed the woman standing quietly in the back, Spivey's mother, watching her son through tearful eyes, filled with both pride and guilt. The chairwoman, however, saw an opportunity. She began pushing Spivey into interviews, events, and photo shoots. He was everywhere, but inside, he felt emptier than ever. He knew none of them really cared. They just wanted his fame. Then came the day of a live talk show. The host bombarded him with tough questions, just to boost ratings. Spivey froze. The audience waited in awkward silence. And then, his mother quietly walked onto the stage. Everyone gasped. What she said next would change Spivey's life forever. Want to know what happened next? Follow me. I'll tell you the rest of the story soon.